we had talked a week or so ago, and I think that I learned something that, since I've mentioned it to other people, that none of us have known, and that is that the St. Louis Blues hockey team also is a derivative of Chicago.
That's very true. The St. Louis Braves were a minor league hockey team in town in the mid-'60s. They played in a building, the St. Louis Arena, which is no longer there, but it was owned by Bill Wirtz, the owner of the Chicago Blackhawks. And it was about the time that the NHL, excuse me, was looking to expand from their original 6 teams and bring in 6 expansion teams. And St. Louis and Baltimore were kind of the last 2. And Bill Wirtz kind of stepped in and he said, if you can find investors who will buy the arena, then I'll see to it that you guys can get that final franchise, and that's what happened. Solomons, Sid Jr. and Sid III, who made their money in the insurance industry, they bought the team, treated all the players like kings, spent a lot of money to refurbish the arena. Instead of plexiglass around, back in the day, there was chicken wire around to protect the fans. Yeah. But they, installed all the plexiglass like there were in the existing arenas, and as I said, treated the players very well. They got the use of a Dodge Barracuda, very slick car, which was done up in sort of a blues motif. Took them on family vacations, just treated them and paid them so well that the other owners got jealous and despised the Solomons because you're making it bad for all of us.
Yeah.
Typical owner talk.
Was the age of the average age of athletes as young then when it started?
Well,
or did it skew a little higher.
In the Blues case, it would have skewed higher because of as being an expansion team, you either got prospects or you got the older players that teams didn't want to pay anymore. Mm-hmm. And so the Blues had a lot of veteran players and actually had some Hall of Famers play for them, for a while for the tail end of their career. And the Blues became the most successful of those 6 new expansion teams and went to the Stanley Cup Finals 3 years in a row, their first 3 years of existence.
Holy cow. Yeah, that's something else I didn't know. I always knew, like during my era of watching, it was always, I always referred to, and our friend Reed Lowe gets very frustrated that I always bring up basketball in association with hockey because I wasn't really a hockey guy. And I played basketball, and so I would always make reference to or analogies. One of their least favorites of my buddies that I do is I was like, man, when you guys came across half court and you shot that three-pointer, and he's like, the blue line and there's no three-pointer. But I always used to think of the St. Louis Blues as the Utah Jazz of hockey, because during the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, mid-2000s era, it seemed like we were in the playoffs every single year, consecutive. Didn't we have the longest playoff stretch?
25 consecutive years in the playoffs.
Yeah, but so always a bridesmaid, never a bride for so long.
It was said now, like in the early 80s, there were 21 teams in the NHL, and they had a 16-team playoff.
Okay.
So somebody made the crack once that it's what do you say about a league that all they do is they play an 80-game regular season just to eliminate Winnipeg?
So Winnipeg was the
they were and they were kind of Winnipeg is not in the greatest area unless you like really cold weather.
Yeah.
And they were not very good at the time. Yeah.
Huh. So, original 6 were what? Blackhawks, Penguins?
Blackhawks, Bruins, Rangers, Red Wings.
Okay.
Let's see here. Who am I leaving out?
Has to be a Canadian team in there.
Toronto, the Maple Leafs, and let's see here. Who am I? Gosh, I'm
so it's Cincinnati.
No,
Toronto.
No Cincinnati. Montreal, Toronto, Detroit, Chicago, Boston, and New York. The Rangers.
Okay, that's who we left out the first time. Yeah. I don't know why I said Cincinnati. I meant Detroit when you said Red Wings.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I was thinking Cincinnati Reds.
Yep.
And again, cross-pollinated my sports because I'm not a hockey guy. But I think that there's probably even more about the rivalry between Chicago and St. Louis, just in sports in general. But I thought that point was interesting. The Harry Carey thing had totally eluded me until now, too. What other kind of correlations might not be mainstream understanding between the two cities?
Well, for a long time, the Cardinals and Cubs have had that long-standing rivalry.
Yeah.
Dating back decades.
What about when we had our football team here, the original football team?
Well, the St. Louis football Cardinals were, before that, they were the Chicago Cardinals.
Okay.
They came from Chicago as well.
Oh, I think I remember that because isn't isn't it? I know this. The Illinois State bird is actually a cardinal.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. Yes, but the Cardinals were always sort of the stepchild, if you want to call it that, to the Bears. The Bears were owned by George Halas, whose daughter just passed away last weekend at the age of 102. But the Halas family has owned the Bears since 1919, and Halas was a player in the NFL. Played for the Yankees also, little known fact. But he was one of the original owners that got together in the auto dealership of a guy in Canton, Ohio, and that's where they formulated the NFL as it was then and grew to be the monolith that it is now.
So, ergo the Hall of Fame being in Canton, Ohio.
Correct. Yes, and the automobile at the time, the dealership that they were in was called the Hupmobile. Don't ask me about about any more of the specifics, but the Hupmobile dealership.
As in H-U-T?
H-U-P.
Hup. Okay.
Hupmobile. So anyway, the Bears were the dominant franchise in the NFL, certainly in the 40s, and Halas coached for, I believe, 50 seasons before he kind of took a
50?
step back. Yeah.
50 seasons?
He started when he was in his 20s.
But still.
As a coach, yeah.
That's pretty incredible.
Yes, it was.
Is there anything like that in modern day?
Connie Mack, the baseball manager with the Philadelphia Athletics, he managed well into his 70s, I think, and he was always known for wearing a suit and tie on the bench. Probably the only manager to do that, and certainly the last one that did that.
Yeah.
But yeah, he and Halas were probably comparable in number of years. But the Cardinals, on the other, they were the South Side team. The Bears were the North Side team.
Okay.
The Cardinals were owned by Charlie Blue Shirt Bidwill. That name may sound familiar to football fans. And he passed away in the 40s. They'd put together a team that had won a won a championship and then gotten to the finals there, or the championship came the next year. He passed away, and his wife remarried, and they did not manage the team very well. The team kind of fell off. And so by the end of the 1950s, they were kind of looking around for another market and wound up here in St. Louis. And so her sons, Bill and Stormy Bidwill, took over the ownership of the Cardinals and ran them until Stormy decided he and Bill did not always see eye to eye on football decisions. So Stormy took the ownership of Sportsman's Park Racetrack up in Chicago, and Bill kept the Cardinals.
Sportsman. No, we had a Sportsman's Park.
It was the stadium before
ownership?
the first. No, different ownership.
Oh, just a coincidence.
Yes, but it's I think Sportsman's Park is still in existence up in Chicago as a racetrack.
Okay.
And Stormy just passed away a few years ago, but he ran that very successfully, I might add. And Bill was the owner of the Cardinals, and not the greatest times. He really didn't really care or didn't have much of a sense for public relations. Very quiet man, very shy man, but he kind of relied on people who may or may not have been very football savvy. Thought they were, but they had 3 winning seasons during the entire time, 4 winning seasons during their 28 years in St. Louis, 4 or 5.
20 years is a long time. Didn't we have the
Yes.
Browns at some point too?
In baseball, we did, yes. They were, believe it or not, back in the day when we talked about Sportsman's Park,
Yeah.
the Browns were the owners of Sportsman's Park. The Cardinals were tenants of Sportsman's Park.
Okay.
But the Browns were not a very successful franchise for a long time. They were known as first in shoes, first in booze, last in the American League.
Oh, so just like a big frat house.
Yeah, kind of. And so, but then, the Cardinals were able to basically become the power team in St. Louis to the point where the Browns had to move out.
Huh.
And they moved to Baltimore and became the Orioles.
Ah.
Yeah, but
So the Orioles was an expansion team then?
no, they just transferred the franchise and changed the name.
Okay.
And
so a transfer of a franchise is
well,
not
it was
considered expansion because you still have the same amount of teams.
Expansion team is a brand new team.
Okay.
So painful point, but it's kind of like the Rams. We took the Rams when Georgia Frontier moved them here to St. Louis.
We finally got
and
that
then,
money this year, didn't we? Last year?
It's been about 3 years, and we're still trying to figure out how to spend it. But yeah, $790 million. Yeah.
You think it'll be spent
the
on
area.
sports?
No, it looks like it's going to go to public improvements and
Infrastructure.
things like that. But as I said, they're still trying. St. Louis, I believe, has $280 million of it. A lot of it went to attorneys' fees, but the county got some money, and I think the state got some money as well. The city's still trying to figure out how to spend their chunk.
So being in sports, how do you feel about the energy and comeuppance, if you will, of the XFL and how it's affected the St. Louis market? Because I know that I had my ad agency did very, very, very well when the Rams were here, as did a lot of people. And I think the understanding of maybe to outsiders or individuals who didn't maybe have skin in the game, so to speak, with owning a business within that area, didn't really understand the impact or why St. Louis as a whole was so angry about losing the Rams. And it was because there was a lot to be lost with revenue and business and everything. And I think that, in my opinion, the Battlehawks have done so well here because we're clamoring for football, whatever level that may be. And it's a great energy. If you've gotten a chance to go down to the games, it's pretty electric because there's no Green Bay fans sprinkled into the crowd, right? Everybody's a Battlehawks fan.
Yes.
And so it's almost, in my opinion, at least the energy seems better to me and stronger than the last, say, 3 years of our Rams.
Oh, for sure. Say what you will, Stan Kroenke saw greener pastures moving out to L.A. Long before we even got wind of it. There's talk that he had his eye on moving the Rams back to L.A. As early as 2001.
Oh.
So that was always in his gun sights, and when he finally pulled the trigger on it to ensure the move, he just torched the city on his way out. And the comment that he made was that St. Louis is just a baseball town, and so we've been doing it, and without any effort whatsoever. St. Louis has since then shown every reason why we're just more than a baseball town.
Sure.
Every franchise, City SC, the Battlehawks, as you said, are 2 new franchises coming in.
I mean, they both
We
moved into
support.
Yeah.
The PGA Tour has been here. The PGA Championship was a tournament very memorable. As
I know
much
a lot
for
of
the
golfers
crowds.
spoke about how great the welcome was overall in the city,
Yes.
and like Belle Reve where it was held, and just we're a sports town.
We are a sports town, but Stan made $1 billion the day he moved the team out of town, and he could care less, what he said, and he had minions that were doing some lying for him, and and whatever, but whatever it took to get out of town, and now he's He's all the richer. He's got himself a nice $5 billion stadium and complex out in L.A., and the NFL loves him. And
I hear the taxes out
are.
there are pretty steep, so maybe
They are, yes.
I'm sure that doesn't equate to the same as if he was here doing stuff. But
oh no, but he's making much more money, and that's the bottom line for him.
yeah, I think milk costs about the same as a small apartment out in LA right now. So
that's about right.
He's probably. I don't know if it would behoove him to do so. And then we've had other people move, but one thing, to the effect of being a sports town. One of my favorite parts about the fandom here in St. Louis is how gracious everyone is. When individuals trade teams and they come back, they still get very warm welcomes. I've seen many a Cardinals player, many a Rams player when we had them would be transferred out or come back in or go somewhere else, and then when they're back home playing, as it's considered, like Pujols was a great example of that, right?
Well,
standing ovations.
We can even extend that out to say what you will about Skip Schumacher as a player.
Mm-hmm.
He made the major leagues, which is more than I can say for myself, but he did not have a career even coming close to Albert Pujols.
Yeah.
And yet when he came back to town for the first time, he got the same standing ovation. St. Louis fans love their players, and they show their support even after they're gone.
We have a lot of retired athletes that choose to stay in St. Louis.
That's yet another thing. The Blues have, you brought up Reed Lowe, the Blues have the best alumni group in the NHL of all the NHL teams, and that's because so many of the players that come to town may have grown up in Canada. Kelly Chase, Porcupine Plain, South Saskatchewan,
right,
lives here in St. Louis. Has always lived. Tony Twist is another Canadian who's chosen to live here. Al McInnes, you can. Chris Pronger is here. So it's a town that embraces their sports athletes.
Yeah, and then our other buddy that has a show on our network, hometown boy Cam Jansen.
Yes, sir. Yes,
right?
sir.
He gets a warm welcome everywhere he goes.
And deservedly so.
Yeah.
I don't think he's ever met a stranger, has he?
No.
Yeah.
All those guys are pretty gracious.
They
are
are
pretty good people.
Well, they recognize that you get treated well by being nice back, and as much as St. Louis has embraced the athletes, the athletes do the same thing in return. So it's
kind of unique in the sense too. For me, at least, it's like the three guys that we work closely with. There's another one that'll be in here right after you're leaving, Soupy, Jim Campbell. But the other three guys, Twister, Cam, and Reed, those were prolific, tough guys. I mean, like some of their records are still in place, but they're the kindest people off the ice.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
Yes, and tough guys on the ice, but they were doing that because that was their role, but also they're standing up for their teammates who don't necessarily want to drop the gloves or should get more respect, and so Twister and Chase and Cam and Reed are those guys that kind of remind the other team you might want to leave these guys alone.
Yeah, there's some big dogs.
Yes.
I've seen a little bit of an uptick in fights again in the NHL. It kind of went away
a little
for a
bit.
while.
It did go away for a while.
There was a softening of America, I believe, for a little while. Sports, nothing political. I'm just saying, sports-wise, because I go back to basketball a bit, and we don't have, not since the Hawks, but one of the arguments that is a generational argument is LeBron, Kobe, and Michael, right? And I think, especially since his passing, Kobe's been recognized as on the same tier, but just below Michael Jordan. And whenever anybody tries to insert LeBron, there's usually a big argument there. And I always say, in my opinion, and you've been watching sports longer than I have, there's two people in his position, because one, I don't think you can compare position player to position player. A forward and a guard, or a power forward, or a center and a guard. But in LeBron's position, I would take Larry Bird or Scottie Pippen any day of the week, in that order, over those guys. And they had to battle. I mean, the NBA in what I would consider the golden age of the NBA was very late 80s to mid 90s. right? Like 87, 88 to whatever. And there was another era with the Celtics and Lakers, but during that time in the mid 80s, early 80s, that was kind of all there was. It was the Celtics and Lakers. Everybody had a duo in the 90s. Every team. You know, we had Ewing and Stark, Larry Johnson and Muggsy Bogues. You had Stockton and Malone. Everybody had a combo. And those guys were at war. I mean, that was a rough game.
It was a much more physical time because while you had the Showtime Lakers and then you had the Celtics, you also had the Nasty Boys, the Detroit Pistons. They kind of set the tone. And Pat Riley, when he moved from L.A. and took the job in New York with the Knicks, that was a tag team wrestling match too, just as much. So that was an era very, very much defined by the physicality of the game.
Mm-hmm. And you had to be physical to play. And I remember Jordan talking about his obsessive need to bulk up because he just couldn't get inside, and that's where his game was strongest.
Well, as much as they called it the Jordan rules for what he was allowed to get away with in his own franchise, really it was what it took to kind of knock him around, and that was the Pistons' way of doing things. And last year, Antonio Pierce of the coach of the Las Vegas Raiders, they beat Mahomes, Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, and so in the offseason, Pierce kind of came out and said, I'm paraphrasing now, that we figured it out. We just have to use the Jordan rules on Mahomes. We have to knock him around. We have to, keep him off balance and whatever. And how did that work this year? Nah, not so well. The Raiders lost both games to the Chiefs.
Right. But that did, this too, you got to think about, in my opinion, sports across the board, that was one person that getting inside of their head was actually a death sentence for you. Because Michael Jordan is the only person, and you, again, might have a different insight, so I'm curious to hear about this, but to me, he had a sixth gear when nobody else did.
Oh, for sure.
And you got inside Jordan's head, and and he would come back to you with a vengeance, and he was good enough to where that would just add fuel to the fire. It didn't really make a difference to him. He didn't have to score 40 points every game, but if you talk trash to him, he'd score 40 in the second half.
That's for sure. And it goes back to, when he was coming out of North Carolina, and Bob Knight, the head coach at Indiana, he was friends with the general manager of the Portland Trailblazers, Stu Inman. Trailblazers had the second pick in the NBA draft that year. Houston Rockets were first, and it was all but decided that they were going to take Hakeem Olajuwon. So Stu Inman's trying to figure out, okay, there's Sam Bowie, a 7-foot center out of Kentucky, and there's Michael Jordan. And who do you take, with number 2? Well, the Blazers at that time had a guy by the name of Clyde Drexler, Clyde the Glide, and
so that position was filled.
Yes, that very much so. The position was filled, and Inman was like, "Well, Bob, I need a center," and he goes, "Oh, I don't care. Play Jordan at center. He'll still be better than whatever you have." He had that ability that Knight called him the single most dominant athlete in his sport, along with Jack Nicklaus in golf. There's a great story, if you don't mind me, taking a few minutes. 1984 Olympics. Bob Knight's the head coach of Team USA.
Yep.
Jordan, of course, is the star player.
And this is when they were just picking college guys. This is before the dream team.
Yes, that's right. That's before they moved on to the pros. And Knight really wanted the Soviet Union because he wanted to show them that he was just going to destroy them. The U.S. had boycotted in 1980. Soviet Union, kind of in retribution, decided they weren't going to come to the LA games. So Knight got disappointed there, but it was all but written in stone that the U.S. was going to win handily. But still, Knight wanted to leave his mark as the greatest, have the greatest Olympic basketball team up to that moment. So they do. They kind of waltz through all their games. They get to the finals. I believe it was against Spain.
Was Patrick Ewing on that team?
Patrick Ewing was on that team,
Yeah.
yes.
Because he was at Georgetown at the same time, right?
Wait a minute, let me think here. No, Ewing was not on that team. Maybe he was, yeah. But my memory's a little weak, but I think he was.
Because he was a year before Jordan on coming out of the draft, I thought.
Year after.
Year
I think.
after?
So,
Okay.
yeah. And you know what, now that I think about it, I don't believe he was on that team.
Okay, we can look. We'll fact check this later. We'll look it up.
Well, let's please fact check that. But Jordan was by far the top player.
Yeah.
And so they're leading Spain by, I don't know, 20 or 30 at the half. And Knight's philosophy always was, I want to get my team to play better in the second half than they played in the first. Well, how are you going to improve on a 30-point halftime lead, right?
Yeah.
So, a staffer gives him a stat sheet as he's walking off the court to go to the locker room and talk to the players. He looks at the stat sheet and he said, Jordan had 15 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists. Just filling up the stat sheet,
Yeah.
right? So Knight's trying to figure out, okay, well, how am I going to get these guys to play better? I'll get on Jordan. Okay, well, with those numbers, what are you going to possibly say to criticize him, right? Mm-hmm. So he goes into the locker room, and he stands over Jordan, and room grows silent, and he says, Mike, I'm looking here at this stat sheet, and I'm seeing 15 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists, 3 blocks, but I haven't seen you set one screen in the entire first half. And how do you expect these guys to want to get the ball to you if you're not setting screens for them? Jordan had this all figured out. He goes, Coach, didn't I read an article a couple of days ago where you said I was the quickest player you'd ever seen on a basketball court? Knight says, well, what's that have to do with this? I think I set the screens a little faster than you see them. And Knight always had to get the last word in.
Yeah.
And he said, well, just make sure you slow down enough to let me see one in the second half. But that was the kind of athlete that Jordan was. He excelled in whatever capacity you needed him. Yeah. Not only was he a great scorer, he was an all-defensive player. He could carry a team or he could support a team. But
yeah, he made all defensive team several years. People often forget about that when they talk about his stats.
That's exactly right. But the most important thing was just that indomitable will, which very few athletes have. Where
people in anything, yeah.
Kobe is another one where it's just, they say that losing bothers them more than winning.
Hypes them up.
Hypes them up. Yeah. Exactly.
Hey, what do you guys think the best 90s sitcom was?
Baywatch. Yeah, Baywatch was good.
Oh, yeah, David Hasselhoff?
The Hoff was cool. Hoff was good with CJ. Come on.
Pamela Anderson?
Oh, okay.
Soupy. 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 Wake up. Wake up. Wake up.
CJ. Cam Jansen. Wrong CJ. Right spot.
Gibson was another one.
Well, and
the Cardinals.
The thing I like to try and bestow upon my 2 sons is that mentality of no shortcuts. Because the thing about it is when you look at these individuals that are at the top of their game, or you take like a Tom Brady, there's never a scenario in an autobiography or biography of any great success where it says, I just showed up and I'm the best. These people were all in the gym before everybody else, at the gym after everyone else, putting in the hours, there's no shortcuts. And in sports especially, there is no shortcuts. There's a lot of natural great athletes, but I often wonder, maybe saying that now out loud, I think of like Babe Ruth. Like if he wasn't a booze hound and eating hot dogs during the game, I wonder how great he could have been.
Which staggers the imagination because 100 years later, we're still talking about him as the greatest player all around to ever play. But yeah, in most cases, what's up here is equal to, if not, and certainly probably greater than the physical gifts you're given. It's how hard are you willing to work. Jordan is certainly an example of that. you see all this natural talent. Well, that had to come from somewhere. You may have some gifts, but it's how you hone them and how you refine them and how you build upon them that makes you the GOAT.
Yeah, repetition.
Yeah.
There's a lot to be said about.
Yeah.
So sports in general, I'd be willing to wager that you're pretty good at sports trivia. Fair?
I would say so, yes. Yes.
You said that your mother was a big sports fan. That's kind of where your passion came from. But what has kept you going? You got into media. Where did that tie-in come from? Just the need to be in sports, or how did that adventure begin?
Well, with no aspersions cast on Bob Costas, I wanted to be the next Bob Costas when I was growing up.
Okay.
People, older kids in my neighborhood or whatever, would always, be astounded by the fact that I would know, little known facts and, and whatever. And I thought that I would want to be an announcer. I would love to have been Bob Costas, but then again, as we found out, there are no Bob Costases other than himself.
Sure.
He's an original. But when I went through college doing that, was the sports director at the student radio station. I did play-by-play, went to a couple of NCAA basketball tournaments.
And what college was it?
Illinois State University up in Normal. And then I got out and I did what every other kid does. You send out your resume tapes and, whatever. Tapes in those days, kids, not reels or, anything that's online.
But VHS, it wasn't.
Yes.
You weren't sending out.
That's correct. Or a link to my YouTube page or anything like that, right? I didn't hear much response, but as is often the case, if a friend of a friend of a friend knew someone at KSDK and was a news producer, and he said, "Well, why don't you go over and introduce yourself and and whatever." And so I did. And he said, "Well, we don't have any, we don't want to have any paid positions right now, but we were always looking for free help. We could always use free help in the sports department. They're always looking for it." Right. So I did that for about a year. Came in kind of on my own. Really, I had more of a background in radio than I did in television. So I kind of started to pick up on the television trade. And then Mike Bush came to town. The next year, and he and I hit it off, and we worked well together, and we kind of thought alike in a lot of ways. And to his credit, which I give him, he badgered the news director to create a position for me at Channel 5. We didn't have a weekend sports producer; we only had one during the week, and so they created the position, and there I walked in to a paid position. Did that for 2 years and then did the weekdays. I moved up to do the weekdays, and I've been there ever since. I just, I'm sure that, that I could have looked out of town for, for other things, but, I was always happy in what I was doing because I felt like I was always growing and adding to my game. And I have. I've learned how to edit. I did some shooting, probably not the best, but but I at least have that in my toolkit.
Sure.
And it's all about growing the full person as opposed to just being a one-trick pony.
What would you say that? I mean, technology's come a long way. I'm sure we could go on forever about the exponential growth in technology for that field. But what are some of the things you miss that are not done the same way?
Oh boy, to miss. Boy, that's a hard question. I don't know that there's much that I'm. It's all. My career to me has been all about relationships, and the people that have come through, and the people.
I was curious that you said it because I was going to ask. There was probably a lot more need for face-to-face meetings and discussing things differently than there are now, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
Or engaging with athletes.
Right. Now, back in the day. Union restrictions were pretty strong at the time, and so I think the first time I reached out to maybe touch a machine or whatever, I got my hand slapped because that was a no-no. Well, now we have much more freedom. As I said, we used to have union editors, we used to have union photographers, and that's the landscape has changed now where we can get out and do that stuff on our own. And the thing that I've come to find out about myself is I see myself as a creative person. And so these just give me more outlets to exercise my creativity. And that's the thing I love the best. But it's all about the relationships. Jay Randolph, who we honored last week in the KSDK Hall of Fame, and Ron Jacober. I learned, I caught them sort of at the tail end of their time at Channel 5, but I still consider them very good friends to this day. And, I owe my career to, the people that came before me. Mike Bush certainly gave me enough rope to hang myself with, if you want to call it that, where he just gave me more and more creative freedom, and that has grown over the years. Frank Cusimano has been a great champion of mine any chance he gets, and I'm always very grateful for that. But he says, if you've got an idea, run with it, do it. Let's. I don't even give it a second thought. Let's just do it. So that gives you a lot of confidence.
Yeah, well, he's a class act too. He's
Yes.
a good guy.
Absolutely.
I worked with him in radio for several years over at K-Fans.
Yes.
That was actually his willingness to let creative juices flow was, I think, did I tell you about, that was my first sale ever when I was selling advertising.
Yes.
I hadn't met him yet, and him and Martin Kilcoyne were doing a show, and I had made this suggestion to somebody I was cold calling through a phone book, and I still had to wear a tie at work in my cubicle. And after the show, I said, hey, I pitched this idea, and it's called this, and this is the name of the segment. Can we add it to the show? And Frank's like, how much did you sell it for? And I told him, and he said, yeah, I'll drive us over there right now. Let's go close this down.
That is Frank. He has a much more broad picture, I think, than I do. Sales is not really my forte. I'm more about the product, and I guess maybe that's another thing that we work well together with. But he's got a great vision, for things that he wants, and not only that, he has the drive to make it happen, and I give him complete admiration for that.
From what you've seen into where things are now, what would you predict if you were put on the spot as you are being right now, since I haven't asked you this question previously? What might the future of sports radio and or sports television look like now that everything is streaming and everything? I mean, is radio something that, I'll just say this, in my opinion, radio is something that is on its way out. And I don't know if that's a 5-year or a 10-year, but it is the auxiliary cable, it is the TV antenna, it is the DVD player of the yesteryear. And with all the streaming things, it still has a better foothold than I think cable television because there's less options per se. But where do you see the future of sports being viewed, and how does that affect the local markets for television, radio?
Well, maybe I'm an old timer, but I don't quite see the death of radio yet, so long as we have automobiles.
Okay.
And I think that there still is an appetite for whatever, be it music or be it sports talk or news talk or whatever. Just the thought of driving in a car and not having any sort of ambient sound around you or whatever. I don't see that. I think everybody wants to have some sort of
Well, yeah, but a lot.
not
I
necessarily
stream
distraction.
mine.
Sure. Well,
That's
that's
why
right.
I say that.
Yeah. Oh, I understand.
So
that.
just like local radio, and I know that the difficulty in selling advertising for that has been tough. And as you know, with radio and television, we live and die by our ads because that's where the money is made.
Yeah, I would just say, as an outsider, the ability to create a niche that that will satisfy as broad an audience as you can, maybe will keep it from dying off. I don't know, but you're right. The trend now is towards streaming, and the radio itself may be phased out. I can still remember having our first conversations at the station that one day television is going to die off, and it's going to be everything is going to be geared towards the web. and kind of scoff at that, like, how is that going to be possible? Well, kick that can down the road a little bit longer, and yeah, I can see where that may be a case where it's just going to sort of be an off in the corner kind of thing, because the people now that rely on broadcast television, will evolve out, and then the people that have grown up with the web will become their age, and so it will live on as long as they're still alive.
Right.
But then now the youngsters coming up and deal with streaming all the time, and they would look at a radio and say, "What is that?"
And the attention span.
Oh my gosh,
far
yes.
less.
Yes, the attention span is much less.
You don't have to watch ads anymore if you don't want to, but if you are watching them, they're very tailored to exactly what you're looking for.
Depending on what your income is, yeah, and your toleration for that sort of thing, right? You don't have to listen to ads.
Yeah.
Which is going to be a challenge for those those money makers to find a way to get those ads positioned so that it's still a money-making proposition. But, as far as I'm concerned, as far as technical, I was just thinking the other day, we're on our 5th format for recorded stories that go in a newscast.
Format meaning?
Meaning, well, we started off with film,
Okay.
then went to U-matic 3/4-inch videotape, then went to 1/2-inch videotape, then 1/4-inch videotape, and now almost everything we do is nonlinear. It's
all in the cloud.
It's all in the cloud, and it's all we have editing machines where we can transfer tape and digitize it, and then once it's digitized. Take, for example, back in the days of the Rams when they were in their glory years. We would have 2, possibly 3 reporters doing stories on that day's Rams game.
Okay.
You have one tape, basically. You have one. We had 2 photographers that were recording the game on site at the Dome, and then we had the broadcast video. So only one person could use that stuff at a time while they're building their story, and so just try to figure out parceling that out among 3 different stories, in a night, and
Or 3 different egos and talents.
Well, yes, that's right. The pecking order as to who would go first and who would have to wait until the end. So, but now with nonlinear, you can have 10 different people working on the same
on your
clips
phone.
at the same time, and there's your phone. Yeah, exactly. So it's become much more easy to kind of have access to things. What you do with it after that, then again, is another story. But
one of the silliest things I ever said early on in radio, I was asked when I had first started selling at K-Fans, we still had St. Louis Sports Magazine too, and my sales
magazine,
manager.
what's that?
Right. Right. You used to take that internet thing and print it on paper. My sales manager asked me what one of my goals were. What are 3 of your goals? How you can help K-Fans? And I said, I want to help us get so big that we become an FM station. He's like, that's not really the way radio works. And I was like, oh, okay. I thought maybe like it was an upgrade. Like you take AM, like, oh, this AM station's getting so big, we're going to put it over on the FM side of things. Because I had no understanding of that. But yeah, you never really can tell how things are going to develop. Never at the age of 10 years old walking through a Blockbuster did I ever think that process would be any different, And now my youngest son, who's 9, has never experienced that. My oldest, who will turn 21 this year, has rented videos. But the little man has never had the experience of, if they don't have it, you can't watch it, right? And then that's when you go into the other aisle and you pick, well, what do I want to see again, or what haven't I seen yet? And some of that nostalgia, I think, is stronger because of you had to work for stuff.
That's for sure.
Even entertainment. You had to work for entertainment. Now you don't really have to work for much. Like we said about our phones. Like you can do anything you need to in the palm of your hand.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
Could you have fathomed such a thing in the 80s?
No. I can still hear the chattering of the wire service machine in the sports office, cranking out stories on the, and the copy coming through there. And now all I got to do is pick up my phone or, on the, desktop or whatever, and go to whatever and find the information that you need. Yeah, it's crazy. I have a box full of cassette tapes. Well, I have a box of VHS tapes and and whatever, that haven't seen the light of day in 20 years. Because there's just not the capacity to play them out anymore. And so, I guess I'm considered a hoarder that I haven't got rid of them all. But I keep thinking, well, maybe the day will come. I really want to listen to this again, or whatever. But
there's big money in VHS now. A lot of celebrities and stuff are collecting VHS tapes.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
I still have my whole Looney Tunes and Disney collection and Ninja Turtles and Thundercats and a bunch of stuff that I grew up with that both my sons, have seen. So something I like to leave with on the show is, and I'm excited to hear yours, but what saying, phrase, or mantra might you have heard in your time that has stuck with you, or that you find yourself practicing or passing on? If there is a singular, or if you can think of two, but singularly, is there anything that really stands out in your mind?
Well, I think the most important one for me is something I just read this morning. I can get it done. And I think that's very important. It's something, that internally I fight with all the time, and I think a lot of us do. Mm-hmm. But if you can just keep that thought, in your head that you can get it done, then you'll find a way to get it done.
Okay.
So I think that's probably the most important thing that I would impart. If my son was watching this, he's going to cringe when I tell him this, but I used to tell him all the time growing up, I used to say, it's what you learn after you know it all that counts. And he used to hate that. Anytime I would make a mistake, it's what you learn after you know it all that counts. And I think I told him enough that, it kind of really grated on him after a while. But there's a lot of truth in that. Once you stop thinking that, or once you keep thinking that you've got it all figured out, our business is a complete example of that. If I would have thought that we would have ever gone to a nonlinear format or streaming or whatever the case may be, there's always a smarter person out there that's going to come up with the next big thing, right?
Yeah.
So as long as you have that sort of mind to keep it open, that you can always learn stuff, I think that's another thing that I've really come to figure out in the last few years. It's amazing what age does to you as far as your perspective goes.
Yeah.
So I think, always knowing that there's something else out there that you can learn, and there are always people out there, yourself for sure, that I can always learn from. As long as I keep myself knowing that I'm not the smartest guy in the room, then I'm going to be just fine.
Well, and likewise, and very grateful for you bestowing some of your knowledge today. And one of my favorite things about maturing, and I'm just now beginning at 41, and I'll probably feel differently at 45. That's something I like to tell my sons too, my 21-year-old especially, or soon to be 21-year-old, is I said something similar is, watch how much you realize you didn't know every 4 years. When you look back on what you thought you knew at 16 versus now at 20.
Oh my gosh.
Right? I mean, even my 9-year-old, he'll be 10 this next month. He's in 4th grade. Wait, is this March already? No, he'll be 10 in March. Yeah.
Not quite yet.
Yeah.
Don't rush it.
No, I'm not. And I try and think back because I can still, I'm on the cusp of not remembering that age, but I still remember it a bit. And man, I really thought I knew a bunch of stuff then. And I'm like a 4th grader. And when he says things to me, sometimes it's so outlandish and so whatever. And so I love knowing that I'm going to know more tomorrow and the next day and the next day, because I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah.
And rather than forcefully, pushing my agendas and beliefs, I'm just like, I'm going to keep that fluid, because that might change.
Humility is a great thing, and Mark Twain had the great saying that when I was 15, I thought my father was the dumbest man on the planet, But then by the time I turned 21, I realized just how smart he'd gotten in 6 years. So, I thought as a father, well, I know a lot more than, now I get astounded all the time.
Yeah, it's a give and take, right?
It is a give and take.
Yeah, you gotta learn the wisdom, and that's applicable to your knowledge. So
Right.
you can be an intelligent person who has a lot of ignorance in different ways, and then if you can absorb other people's wisdom and apply that, in my opinion, that is the application of knowledge, is working towards obtaining the wisdom, and it takes a lot of loss to get there.
That is for sure. I feel like I'm making up for a lot of lost time, so
Yeah.
I hope I have a lot more years so I can catch up with some of the smarter people out there.
Yeah, well, I'd love to have you talk more about sports history, and maybe even spin off and do your own thing at some point. I'll keep poking and prodding there. But you're a plethora of knowledge, and I'm extremely grateful for you taking the time. And even though we had technical difficulties, you were kind enough to come back in. So,
Not a problem. I appreciate the opportunity.
all right, thank you, Andy, so
You
much.
bet. Thank you.